And our next guest is speaking to us from the UK, which is experiencing some of the same problems, it would seem, that we are experiencing here in the United States with high drug prices and what I would characterize as exceptionally greedy pharmaceutical companies. But we will let our next guest speak for himself on that subject. Diarmaid McDonald is, among other things, an activist on health issues, including global HIV issues, and he's become, in recent years, increasingly involved in the impact of the pharmaceutical industry on the National Health Service there in the UK. So he started the group Just Treatment, and recently there was an article about an issue that the UK is dealing with right now, which is a drug called Orkambi. Orkambi is a drug used in the treatment of cystic fibrosis, which of course is a terrible disease affecting children. And here to talk to us now about his work and perhaps a little bit to enlighten us about Orkambi and other struggles in the UK is Diarmaid McDonald. So first of all, Diarmaid, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Richard. It's a pleasure.
And we really appreciate the work you're doing. This is such an important area. You know, I think two thoughts to start with. One is that I think we in the United States assume that the National Health Service, well, it's obviously vastly better in design and execution, at least from my understanding, and I lived in the UK, but it was many years ago, than our, what is euphemistically described as a healthcare system in the United States, which is a greed-based anarchy, actually. But I guess I would start with this. You know, it might be a bit surprising for some of our listeners to learn that there even is a problem with drug pricing in the United Kingdom, but clearly there is, or you wouldn't have become active in this area. So maybe you could give us a sense of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've always looked with, I guess, dismay across the Atlantic at the state of access to healthcare in the US and the state of high drug prices there. But the NHS is a really important social and socialist commitment that we have in the UK to the priority of delivering people healthcare and the right to health. But I guess we're not, as you say, completely immune from some of the challenges that go with delivering a fair and equitable access to healthcare that you guys have seen there in the US. I think over the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen growing numbers of medicines which have been simply priced too high for the National Health Service to afford. And we've seen rationing of medicines, and we've seen drugs which have been denied to patients that could otherwise benefit from them, largely down to the prices that have been charged by the drug companies as they're seeking to maximize the profits they make from every patient. So right now, we're in the middle of one particular crisis with a medicine, as you mentioned, Orkambi, which has been priced in the UK at £105,000 per patient per year. I think you're talking in US dollars at the moment. The exchange rate isn't so hot, so you're talking about 130 to 140,000 US dollars, and that's a drug which you have to take every day for life. So this is a drug company from Boston, Vertex Pharmaceuticals, that are seeking to charge a price which the NHS have said isn't cost effective, is not worth the money that is being demanded. That simply put, they need to reduce their price in order for it to be affordable for the UK. And so that's a fight which is playing out at the moment around Orkambi, but we've seen it over the last 5-10 years around hepatitis medicines. So there may have been some controversy that you guys have heard of around access to hepatitis C medicines, the drug from Gilead called Sofosbuvir, which was priced at $1,000 per pill. We had the same problems here in the UK. That drug was rationed for many years. You were basically told, come back when you get sick enough before you could get access. The same thing has happened with breast cancer drugs and drugs for other cancers as well. So this is a problem, you know, we have great faith in the NHS. It's a really important it's run on really important principles and a really important equitably delivered public service. But it's not without its challenges, and one of the challenges that we see is where that social structure of the NHS bumps up against the most profitable industry in the world, in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, it's interesting in some ways to compare and contrast, and of course, what we should keep foremost in our mind throughout the entire discussion is the immense human suffering that results from it. But in the United States, where we have a largely privatized system, if you're under 65, we have people are left often individually with these astronomical costs of their medicines, so they can't afford them individually, and they do without them. In the UK, you have the NHS system, which is by design a terrific system, and it's as if collectively people can't afford to step up to the greed of the pharmaceutical industry, but perhaps not as severely, but when it happens, equally tragically, people can't get the medications they need in both cases because of the same root cause, the greed of a pharmaceutical industry that only has the ability to, in effect, blackmail people with their lives for these extreme prices because the government is granting them a patent for an idea. So the government grants them the exclusive right for this idea or this conception or this design, which in many cases was primarily developed by public researchers at public expense, and they use that government-granted exclusivity to charge these prices, and people suffer and sometimes die. Is that an unfair summary in your view?
I mean, that's a perfect summary. I think, the tragedy with Orkambi is it's a perfect distillation of so many things that are really messed up about the pharmaceutical industry and how we incentivize the development of the medicines that we need at the moment. What we've seen over the situation with the UK is frighteningly similar to some of the horrible things that we've seen affect patients in the US around high drug prices. It's estimated that over 200 patients have died without access to this drug since it was first approved for use. And in that time, in the last 3 and a bit years, whilst the drug company has been refusing to offer a fair or reasonable price to the UK's National Health Service, patients have died without access. We know that of about 4,000 patients that could benefit from this drug would be put on it tomorrow by their doctor if it was only affordable for the health service. And most tragically, and something which is something that we kind of never really thought would come to pass in the UK with the NHS, we know patients and families that have had to pay out of pocket to get the drug for their children. We know of a family who've got a 7-year-old daughter who had a choice between watching her disease progress to the point where the drug would no longer be helpful or useful for her, either allow that to happen or they find a way to pay for it, and they've paid out of pocket. They've remortgaged their house. They've raided their the kid's grandfather's pension plan in order to pay out of pocket between £13,000 per month for access to the drug. And that 13,000, and again in US, you're talking between $17,000 and $18,000 per month to pay for a drug. That's completely unsustainable. It's bankrupting people in the way that we've seen, healthcare costs bankrupt patients in America. And you're totally right. This is lies at the door of a greedy drug company that's seeking to maximize its profits and would rather hold out to try and get the highest possible price out of the NHS than it would to settle today and allow patients to get immediate access. And it all comes down, they've got the power to do that because of the monopoly that they've been granted. And so what our campaign has been saying, that we launched just last week, in response to this standoff where the company is refusing to drop the price, we've got, at the moment, we don't think it's good enough that we should just pay whatever high price the drug company demands. That's not an appropriate solution to this. But we also do think that allowing patients to die without access is an acceptable solution on the part of the government. And so what we've proposed is that we use the flexibilities that exist in the law. Whenever these monopoly protections were designed for drug companies, it was realized that those rights could not be absolute. They had to come up against and be balanced against the right of a patient to get access to a life-saving or a life-changing treatment. But unfortunately, our governments have, under pressure from the lobby of the pharmaceutical industry, backed away from using those flexibilities. And what we've called for the government to do this week is for them to suspend the patent on Vertex's product, Orkambi, and allow a more affordable generic version of the drug to be purchased for the NHS. And with that effort, we estimate from taking quotes from suppliers and using some the advice of experts, we think the price to the NHS for this drug could drop from £105,000 per patient per year to less than £5,000 per patient per year. So that gives you an indication of how much profit this drug company is seeking to make out of every single patient. And if you look at the US, the price for this drug in the US is $270,000 to $300,000 They're making the generic price I just quoted for less than £5,000. You're talking less than $10,000 very easily. The profit margin in the US is in the realm of hundreds of thousands of dollars per patient. And so to us, that's totally unacceptable whenever the consequences of pricing at that level is the inability of sick children to get the drug that could change their lives.
Yeah, it's both heartbreaking and infuriating. And what we always hear in this country now, the UK doesn't have quite the runaway culture of corporate personhood that the United States does. But what we hear in this country a great deal is that, well, if you do that, in other words, we have similar proposals. I should first preface by saying in the United States, we had a 1980 law that called the Bayh-Dole Act that could be invoked to do something similar in certain cases. We have new legislation that's been proposed in the Congress and in the Senate here. The counter argument that you get in the States is, well, you're impinging on the rights of corporations to do as they please. And there was an American humorist named Will Rogers in the 1920s who said, "Your right to swing your fist ends where my nose begins." And I would argue that that's an applicable principle here, particularly when children are involved. But so what does the political landscape look like for the case you're trying to make in the UK? Because here, I believe, our mission is gaining steam and our message is gaining adherence. But how's it going there in the UK?
Well, we've had a really great week. We've got a huge amount of coverage of the campaign launch, and I think it's very clear. Like, there's only so far that corporate rhetoric can go whenever you're trying to justify charging prices that prevent children from accessing medicines. And I think what people have seen is that if we are truly presented with this choice between furthering the profits of a drug company and undermining the NHS and the care that it provides to every UK citizen, or denying children access to medicines, then yeah, it's self-evident that intellectual property rights are not as important as a child's right to life, and it shouldn't be as important as any human right to life. And so, the response has been pretty impressive. We've had a debate in the Houses of Parliament and the House of Commons last Monday, where a number of politicians across the political divide spoke in favour of taking this step. We've had support from the official opposition, who've also called on the government to consider taking this step if the drug company Vertex refuses to agree a fair price. So we've got a huge amount of media coverage and interest. So I think I think, as I said before, I think it's self-evident whenever this is a question of either saving lives or further feathering the nest of a drug company that's got over $3 billion in the bank and is turning over $3 billion per annum and is paying its executives tens of millions of dollars in salary payments every year. Yeah, I think we should prioritize our NHS and a fair healthcare system, and we should prioritize the lives of those children instead of the interests of that drug company. And I think, most normal people with any sense of what's right and wrong support that. And it's just about whether we can, hopefully what we'll see as an outcome of this is that, that drug company will recognize that it's in the wrong, that it is acting in an unjustified way, and it will take steps to reduce its price. But if it doesn't, then the government should be prepared to suspend its patent and buy an affordable version of the drug.
And to which I would only add, as a comment to the drug companies in question, in this case, Vertex, that if meeting your quarterly earnings requires you to kill children, you might want to consider getting in another line of business. And with that, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. But Diarmaid McDonald of Just Treatment, thanks so much for your great work in this area, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks so much, Richard. I really appreciate it and look forward to maybe speaking about it again sometime, because there's lots of commonalities between the fight in the US and the fight in the UK.
Yeah, one of the commonalities is the common opponent we must struggle against. So absolutely, we will speak again.